By the end of October, the Harper farm looked like the kind of place people slowed down to pity. From the road, the south pasture was full of shallow holes, 99 of them, scattered across the slope like the land had broken out in scars. Some held a skin of muddy water. Some were ringed with straw and flat stones. Some were dry enough that the clay at the bottom had cracked into little plates. Behind the dairy barn, the concrete pad was piled with pumpkins. Not the bright, picture-perfect pumpkins that families bought at roadside stands and placed on front porches. These were the leftovers, soft at the stems, bruised along the ribs, split open from frost. Some had collapsed into themselves, orange flesh sinking under gray November sky. The air behind the barn carried a sweet, sour smell that drifted all the way to the fence when the wind came from the west. Emily Harper stood between the mud holes and the pumpkin piles with a shovel in her hand, 18 years old, her father's old canvas coat hanging loose on her shoulders. A white pickup rolled slowly along County Road 16, then stopped near the mailbox. Inside was Ray Caldwell, who had farmed the next place over for 37 years and had known Emily since she was small enough to ride on a feed sack in the back of her father's truck. Ray did not laugh. That almost made it worse. He only looked over the pasture, then at the pumpkins, then at Emily. His face carried the tired expression of a man watching someone make a mistake he did not know how to stop. Emily looked down first. She drove the shovel into the edge of basin number 72 and pulled wet clay toward the berm. The pickup stayed there a moment longer. Then it moved on, gravel popping under the tires. By supper, the story would be at the diner. By morning, it would be at the feed store. By the end of the week, everybody in Mill Creek County would have some version of it. Tom Harper's girl had dug 99 mud holes in good pasture. Now she was feeding rotten pumpkins to dairy cows, and the bank was still waiting. The Harper Dairy had not failed all at once. It had gone the way barns go when no one has enough money to fix the first leak. One bad season became two, a sick cow became a vet bill, a late payment became a letter. The tractor started only if Emily held the choke just right and whispered a prayer she did not believe would count. The milking pump made a dry, grinding sound near the end of every evening shift. The barn roof leaked over the west stalls, and when rain came hard, water ran down the inside wall past the framed photograph of her father, holding a blue ribbon calf at the county fair. Tom Harper had died in June. By July, Emily knew the farm's noises better than she knew her own thoughts. The rattle in the bulk tank compressor, the slap of loose tin over the calf shed, the hollow cough of the well when the water level dropped too low, the soft, steady chewing of 47 cows that did not care how old she was, how much money she owed, or whether the town believed she could keep them alive. Every morning before dawn, she stepped into the dairy barn and did the work because the cows were waiting. Every night, after washing down the parlor and checking the tank temperature, she went into the house and found the bank envelope where she had left it. Sometimes it sat unopened for days. The number inside never got smaller unless she paid. The date always got closer. The bank officer, Daniel Price, was not cruel. That was part of what made him hard to hate. He had known her father. He had sat at their kitchen table after the funeral, hat in his hands, speaking gently about restructuring, deadlines, risk, and what the board would or would not approve. He did not tell Emily she was too young. He did not need to. The papers said it for him. In August, when most farmers in the county were watching the sky and praying for rain, Emily started digging. She did not dig one pond. That might have made sense. She did not dig a proper reservoir. She could not afford one. She dug shallow basins across the pasture, following lines only she seemed to see. She marked each one with a wooden stake and a number. She dragged old hay around the edges, packed manure into low spots, set flat stones where overflow might cut through, and seeded the rims with native grass. People called them mud holes because that was what they looked like. Ray Caldwell stopped the first morning and stood by the fence while Emily climbed down from the tractor. He asked her whether she was sure about taking that much pasture out of use before fall grazing. Emily said she was sure. She was not. That was the thing no one knew. Her silence was not always strength. Sometimes it was the only way she could keep fear from spilling out of her mouth. If she explained the plan, someone might ask a question she could not answer. If she defended herself, someone might hear how much doubt lived under her ribs. So she let people think she was stubborn. Stubborn looked stronger than scared. The idea had come from the notebooks in the loft above the machine shed. Her grandfather's notebook was brown, warped from damp, full of hand-drawn maps and weather notes from years when the creek still ran clear. Her father's was blue, with corners softened by use and grease stains along the cover. Neither notebook contained a miracle. That disappointed Emily the first time she read them. She had wanted instructions. She had wanted her father to have left behind a perfect answer, something clean enough to follow line by line. Instead, the notebooks were full of failed attempts, crossed-out numbers, angry little comments in the margins, and sketches of fields that had washed out anyway. But one idea appeared again and again. The Harper farm did not lose because it never rained. It lost because it could not hold rain when it came. Her grandfather had written about slowing runoff with grassed waterways and small catch basins. Her father had written about compacted ground, lost topsoil, and the old spring that used to dampen the lower pasture before years of hard use and fast water changed the shape of the land. Emily read those pages at the kitchen table, with the overhead light buzzing, and her father's empty chair across from her. Then she started digging. The first rain proved how little she knew. It came hard in September, a mean storm that turned the road ditch brown in 10 minutes. Emily stood in the pasture in her raincoat and watched basin number 14 spill sideways, and carve a crooked channel straight through the berm she had packed by hand. Number 27 overtopped too fast. Number 31 held. Number 32 failed. By the time the storm passed, her jeans were soaked to the thigh, and one boot was nearly lost in the mud. Water had slowed in some places and torn through others. 3 basins looked exactly like the joke people said they were. Ray Caldwell found her there near dusk, standing over the broken edge of number 14. He could have said he told her so. Instead, he rested both hands on the top wire of the fence and looked at the damage. Emily wanted him to leave. She also wanted him to tell her what to do. The two wants sat inside her like two animals fighting in a sack. Ray finally said that water never forgave pride. Emily's face burned hotter than the humid air. She knew he meant the field, the angle, the berm, but it felt like he meant her. The next morning, she fixed the broken basins before milking. She lowered one overflow, raised another, moved stone by hand, and changed the spillway on 12 more. She did not tell anyone Ray's words stayed with her. She wrote them in the notebook anyway. Water never forgives pride. By October, the basins had begun to work in small ways no one driving by could see. After a shower, the soil around them stayed dark a day longer than the rest of the pasture. The grass near the lower field pushed new blades. Earthworms appeared beneath the straw at the edge of basin number 9. The old spring did not return, but the ground near it stopped cracking open. It was not enough. The dairy still needed feed. The drought that summer had burned hayfields across the county. Good hay sold high. Grain prices climbed after transport delays and short supply. Emily's cows were heading into cold weather thinner than she liked, and the milk check was too small to make the bank believe in patience. That was when she remembered another section of her father's blue notebook. Winter waste feed. It was not a recipe exactly. It was a record of experiments from years when cash had been short. Beet pulp, apple pressings, pumpkin, rough hay, molasses when available, minerals always, clean handling, no mold, slow introduction, watch manure, watch appetite, watch butterfat. At the bottom of one page, her father had underlined a sentence twice. Nothing is waste if it feeds the farm without hurting the animal. Emily sat with that sentence until the kitchen went dark around her. The next morning, she drove to a grocery store after sunrise and asked for pumpkins they planned to throw away. Then she went to a church that had used pumpkins for a fall festival. then to a roadside stand, then to a family whose children had carved jack-o'-lanterns and left the uncut extras to soften on the porch. She brought them home by the truckload. People saw the piles and made the easiest conclusion. At the feed store, the conversation stopped when Emily carried mineral salt to the counter. No one laughed loudly. That would have been kinder. Instead, two men by the coffee machine lowered their voices. One glanced at the mud on her boots. Another looked out the window toward the direction of her farm. At the diner, someone said Tom Harper would have known the difference between feed and garbage. The words reached Emily, because words always reached small farms. They traveled in parts. A cashier repeated one piece. A creamery driver avoided repeating another, but wore it on his face. Daniel Price from the bank called and asked whether she was maintaining herd nutrition standards. Emily told him she was. He asked if she had documentation. She looked at the notebook beside the phone, full of numbers written in her own hand, and said yes. After she hung up, she sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and pressed her palms into her eyes until sparks moved in the dark. She was tired of sounding certain. She was tired of being watched. She was tired of needing dead men's handwriting to feel brave, but cows had to be milked whether she felt brave or not. So she worked. She sorted every pumpkin. Anything black, fuzzy, or truly rotten went to compost. Anything soft but clean was trimmed. She chopped the usable flesh, crushed the seeds, mixed it with dry hay, a little cracked corn when she could spare it, minerals, and molasses stretched with warm water. She packed the mixture into old feed tubs, covered them with tarps, and weighted the tarps with tires. The first batch smelled faintly sweet after 2 days. The second batch spoiled because she had packed it too wet and tried to save hay she should have used. She cried over that one. Not much, not dramatically. Just stood behind the barn before dawn, staring at the sour, ruined feed while frost silvered the grass and the cows shifted inside, waiting for breakfast. Then she shoveled the whole batch into the compost pile and wrote the mistake down. Too wet, not enough dry matter. Saving hay cost more. Her father's notebook had room for failures. So hers would too. By November, the county felt brittle. The drought had not ended so much as loosened its grip. Wells were low. Pastures were tired. Farmers who had always looked steady were quietly selling animals, delaying repairs, stretching rations. The Caldwell place north of Emily's had more land, newer equipment, and Ray's lifetime of experience, but even his hay barn looked emptier than it should have before winter. One afternoon, Emily found him standing by her fence again. This time he was not looking at the basins. He was looking at the pumpkin tubs. Emily expected a warning. She expected a story about someone who had made cows sick trying to save money. She expected pity. Ray only said her father once fed apple pulp through a bad winter and got the best cream checks of his life. Emily did not know what to do with that. It was not approval exactly. It was not an apology. It was a door left open just wide enough to notice. She almost asked him about it. Then fear closed her throat. Ray waited a moment. As if he could see the question, she refused to speak. Then he nodded toward the barn and told her not to let pride keep her from calling if a cow went off feed. That night, one did. Her name was June, a big Holstein with a white splash over one eye. She stood back from the manger, dull and uncomfortable, not sick enough for panic, but wrong enough that Emily felt cold fear move through her stomach. Emily checked her temperature, checked manure, checked the ration notes. She had increased the pumpkin mix too fast for the high producers because she wanted the milk weights to rise before the next bank review. Because she was careful, but not careful enough. Because desperation can dress itself up as discipline. For 20 minutes, she stood in the barn aisle with the flashlight in one hand and the phone in the other. Ray had told her to call. Her thumb hovered over his number. Then she put the phone down and mixed dry hay into June's feed herself. By midnight, June looked worse. At 12:17 a.m., Emily called Ray Caldwell. He arrived in coveralls and barn boots. hair flattened on one side from sleep. He did not scold her. That almost made her cry again. He looked at June, asked what Emily had changed, listened to the ration amounts, and told her to cut the pumpkin back, increase dry hay, and call the vet if June did not pick up by morning. Then he stood beside the feed tubs and studied her notes. Emily waited for him to tell her she had gone too far. Instead, he tapped the page with one thick finger and said her numbers were better than most grown men's. The words landed harder than praise should have. June recovered by morning. Emily wrote that down too. She wrote the mistake, the correction, and Ray's name beside it, because she wanted to remember that asking for help had not killed her. December came in with ice. Roads glazed over. Feed deliveries slowed. Hay prices jumped again. The local creamery announced a premium for milk with higher butterfat and clean tests because holiday demand for cream, butter, and specialty products had outpaced supply. Farms that could deliver steady, rich milk would be paid well. Farms that could not would keep taking the base price and hope winter ended early. For Emily, it was not a lucky break. It was a test with a date on it. Daniel Price needed proof before the bank board met in January, not promises. Not grief, not a story about her father's notebooks. Proof. Emily had 3 things: 99 shallow basins that had kept some moisture in her ground, a herd that had not collapsed through the feed shortage, and pumpkin feed half the county still thought was trash. The first milk report came back on a Thursday. Emily found it folded inside the metal box by the milkhouse door after the creamery truck left. Her hands were wet from rinsing equipment, and she wiped them on her jeans before opening it. Butterfat up. Protein steady. Somatic cell count clean. Volume stable. She read the numbers 3 times. Then she set the paper on the bulk tank and leaned both hands against the cold steel. Nothing about the moment looked like victory. The barn still smelled of iodine, silage, damp concrete, and cow breath. A gutter dripped outside the door. Her coat sleeve was torn at the cuff. Somewhere in the parlor, the old pump clicked like it was counting down to its next breakdown. But the numbers were real. The cows were holding. The second report was better. The third came with a premium check so much larger than the ones before it that Emily drove to the bank with the envelope on the passenger seat and kept touching it at red lights as if it might disappear. Daniel Price did not smile when he saw the amount. Bankers did not like to look surprised. But his pen paused above the desk longer than usual. Emily laid out the creamery reports, the ration notes, the payment record, and photographs of the pasture basins after rain. She did not make a speech. She did not say the town had been wrong. She did not tell him about the nights she had sat on the kitchen floor, unable to breathe past fear. She only showed him the proof. For the first time, Daniel asked how the system worked. Not whether, how. That was when Emily realized something inside her had changed. A month earlier, she would have guarded every page as if her father's notebook were the last private thing she owned. Now she heard herself explaining the basins, the contour lines, the pumpkin ration, the failed batch, June's trouble, the adjustments. She did not sound fearless. She sounded like someone who had survived being uncertain. By January, the Harper farm had not become rich. The debt was still there. The barn still needed more repairs than she could afford. The tractor still smoked blue when started cold. The bank had not vanished from her life. But the overdue payment was made. The herd stayed. The creamery renewed her contract for winter milk. And the farm was still called Harper. The change in town came slowly, which made it feel more real. People did not turn from mockery to worship overnight. Some still thought Emily had been lucky. Some said the pumpkins worked only because she had good jerseys. Some said the ponds would become mosquito pits by summer. A few said nothing at all, because silence was easier than admitting they had judged too soon. But Ray Caldwell came by on a pale Saturday morning with a folded map of his north pasture. He spread it across the hood of his truck and asked Emily where she would slow the water if it were her place. That was the first apology she trusted, because it was not shaped like words. A week later, the county agent came with 2 farmers and a soil probe. Then a dairyman from the next township asked about pumpkin storage. Then the creamery driver asked whether she had enough notes to speak at the winter meeting. Emily nearly said no. The old fear rose quickly. Fear of questions. Fear of being exposed. Fear of standing in front of people who had once drawn little circles in the feed store dust to make fun of her ponds. That evening, she opened her father's blue notebook again. For years, she had treated it like a relic, something to protect. Something that proved the Harper way belonged inside the Harper family. But the pages were not clean. They were not perfect. They were not even finished. Her grandfather had written, then her father had added, then Emily had corrected both of them without meaning to. The notebooks were not a monument. They were a conversation across time. And conversations died when no one answered back. At the winter meeting, Emily stood in front of 32 farmers, a banker, 2 extension agents, and Ray Caldwell in the second row. Her voice shook at first. She hated that. Then she kept going anyway. She showed the map of the 99 basins. She showed where the first ones failed. She showed photos of the broken berm after the September storm and explained what she had changed. She showed the pumpkin feed notes, including the spoiled batch and June's ration mistake. She told them what had worked, what had not, and what she still did not know. No one laughed. Not because she had defeated them, because the work was too honest to laugh at. When the meeting ended, farmers came up one by one. Some asked questions. Some offered corrections. One man admitted he had old notes from his own father about grass waterways but had never used them. The county agent asked if she would be willing to help document the system through spring. Ray waited until the room had nearly emptied. Then he handed her a folded sheet of paper. It was a copy of an old map Tom Harper had drawn years ago, showing water flow across the Caldwell place and the Harper farm together. Emily stared at her father's handwriting. Ray said Tom had tried to talk him into slowing water on both farms once, back before sickness and debt took up so much room. Ray had told him there was no time for old-fashioned ideas. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Emily folded the map carefully and put it inside her notebook. Spring returned slowly. The 99 basins softened at the edges. Grass took hold where clay had been bare. Rain came in a long gray week, and this time, Emily did not stand in the field trying to prove herself to ghosts. She walked the pasture with Ray, the county agent, and 2 neighboring farmers, watching water move from one basin to the next, without tearing the field open. Behind the barn, the last of the pumpkin compost steamed in the morning cold. The cows moved out to graze on grass that had returned in uneven but living patches. The old spring in the lower pasture seeped enough to darken the soil around it. Not a miracle, not a river, just a quiet, wet place where there had been dust. That was enough. One evening in April, Emily repainted the Harper sign at the gate. She did it badly at first. The H ran too thick. The second R dripped. A moth stuck itself in the wet white paint and had to be picked out with the corner of a rag. She laughed when it happened, surprising herself with the sound. Ray drove by and lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel. Emily lifted her brush back. The farm did not look saved in the way stories like to make things look saved. There was no sudden wealth, no shining new barn. No crowd at the fence begging forgiveness. The roof still needed work. The loan still had years left on it. The land still demanded more than it gave some days. But the south pasture held water. The dairy held its contract. The cows held condition through winter. And Emily no longer held everything alone. Inside the milk house, above the sink, she built a small shelf. On it, she placed her grandfather's brown notebook, her father's blue one, and her own black one, thick now with mud fingerprints, feed stains, lab reports, mistakes, and maps. On the first page of the black notebook, she wrote a sentence that was not her father's and not her grandfather's. A farm survives when nothing useful is thrown away, not water, not waste, not old knowledge, not people, Then she capped the pen and went back to work. Years later, people in Mill Creek County would still talk about the season Tom Harper's girl dug 99 mud holes and stacked rotten pumpkins behind the barn. Some would tell it like a joke that turned into a lesson. Some would make it sound cleaner than it was. Some would forget how close she came to losing everything. Emily remembered it differently. She remembered Basin 14 breaking in the rain. She remembered the spoiled feed steaming sour in the cold. She remembered June standing off her ration. She remembered calling Ray at 12:17 in the morning with her pride finally cracked enough to let help in. She remembered the first butterfat report and the way her hands shook over the paper. Most of all, she remembered the day Ray unfolded his map on the hood of his truck and asked where she would slow the water. That was the day the Harper farm stopped being just a place she had to defend. It became a place where the old ways were tested, corrected, shared, and made alive again. People had laughed at the mud holes. They had whispered about the rotten pumpkins. But by the time the pastures greened and the creamery checks cleared, the whole county understood what Emily Harper had learned the hard way. Land does not always need someone louder. Sometimes it needs someone patient enough to listen, humble enough to change, and stubborn enough to stay.